What would you do if your own son used Christmas to steal from your family? The Truman Dixon story will shock you. Subscribe to D-Daily Stories so you don't miss more emotional true stories. Christmas dinner at my son's house was supposed to be the highlight of my year. The dining room glowed with the warm shimmer of candles, the smell of roasted turkey, and cinnamon filling the air. Laughter floated around the table, the children's giggles mixing with the clinking of cutlery and the soft hum of carols in the background. For a brief moment, I let myself believe that life was still as it used to be, whole, unbroken, familiar. Then out of nowhere, the piercing trill of my phone shattered the comfort like a stone through glass. An unknown number. I hesitated but answered. "Go home immediately." The voice was sharp, unfamiliar, but filled with urgency that sank straight into my chest. "Who is this?" I asked, my cheer collapsing into dread. But the caller offered nothing more, only that strained, anxious tone that made my heart race. I excused myself clumsily, my fork clattering against the plate. My son and his wife looked at me in confusion, but I was already grabbing my coat, rushing into the winter night. By the time I reached home, the house loomed in silence, every shadow sharper, every corner colder. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. It hadn't been the first time Christmas had been disrupted. I still remember another December evening when the phone rang again, shrill, insistent, cutting through the quiet like a blade through silk. I had been sitting in my armchair nursing a mug of tea, the steam rising gently as if trying to comfort me. Christmas lights twinkled through the frost-covered window, scattering red and green reflections across the leather chair. I answered with the bright tone I always reserved for family calls at Christmas. "Hello, Dad." That single word froze me. It was Amos, my son. His voice, though, wasn't the warm, steady one I knew. It was clipped cold like the winter air seeping in through the cracks of the house. "Son," I said, forcing a smile he couldn't see. "I was just thinking about Christmas dinner. Your mother's turkey recipe. I've decided we're spending Christmas just with our immediate family this year," he interrupted. Each word landed heavy, deliberate. "Without you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The fireplace crackled behind me, but its warmth felt distant, unreachable. My reading glasses slid down my nose as I blinked hard, trying to make sense of what I just heard. "But son, we always spend Christmas together. What happened? Did I do something wrong?" "Nothing happened." His voice was final, cold as stone. "I just want a peaceful holiday." Violet agrees completely. Violet, the same daughter-in-law who always fussed over me, who saved the wishbone for me every year, who had just asked me about Eleanor's stuffing recipe last month. How could she agree to this, Amos? Please, help me understand. Since your mother passed, Christmas has been our thread, the thing that kept us. This conversation is over, Dad. I hope you understand. Then the line went dead. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a cruel mechanical sound that stung more than any words. I stayed frozen, clutching the receiver long after the call ended, staring at it as if it might somehow take the words back. My tea sat forgotten cold. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, each note a heavy hammer against my chest. I didn't move. Not for minutes, not for hours. The fire dwindled to embers, the room dimmed, and the holiday lights outside blurred into nothing as my eyes filled with tears. When I finally stood, it was as though gravity itself resisted me. I walked slowly to the window and saw my own reflection in the dark glass. A man of 68 suddenly carrying every one of his years. A father who had just learned what loneliness truly meant on Christmas night. Behind my ghostly reflection in the glass, the world outside had begun to soften beneath the steady fall of snow. Thick, lazy flakes drifted down from the black sky, swirling in the faint glow of the street lamps. I pressed my palm against the window and the chill seeped straight through the thin pane, biting into my skin, as though the night itself wanted to claim me. Across the street, the neighbors' homes glowed with warmth. Yellow light spilled from curtained windows, each one a fragile beacon of life. I imagined families gathered around their tables, hands brushing as they passed, dishes, voices weaving laughter, with stories told 100 times before, yet always welcome. Through the Hendersons' wide front window, I could see their Christmas tree proudly standing in the corner, its ornaments glittering like captured stars. Beneath its branches presents lay neatly wrapped, each bow tied with anticipation. each box filled with promises of joy. My own reflection stared back at me pale and hollow-eyed, until my breath clouded the glass and blurred my face into nothing. I whispered softly, as if to the ghost on the other side of the pane. "What did I do wrong?" Eleanor's silence pressed down an answer, thicker, heavier than the snow piling against the curb. I lifted a trembling finger and traced idle looping patterns through the condensation, watching them vanish as quickly as they appeared. My thoughts wandered backward, replaying every recent conversation with Amos, dissecting every tone, every pause. Had I been too forceful about keeping our traditions alive? Too insistent that Eleanor's presence lived on in the rituals of Christmas, her stuffing recipe, her candlelit prayers, her stubborn insistence on saving the wishbone for luck? The Petersons' kitchen light flickered out next door, plunging that window into darkness. Only the street lamps remained their amber halos, catching the endless snowfall, turning each flake into a drifting ember. I remembered Amos as a boy, his nose pressed flat against this very glass, his excited voice counting snowflakes until he lost track, tugging my sleeve, begging me to read him stories about brave children lost in winter forests who always found their way home. That little boy felt like a stranger now, swallowed whole by the man whose voice had cut me off with finality just hours earlier. My fingers, stiff with arthritis, slipped slowly from the frozen glass, leaving behind a faint smudge, the only proof I had touched the world outside at all. I blinked at the clock. 2.5 hours had passed since I had first stood by the window, lost to memory. The fire in the hearth was gone, nothing left but a gray bed of ashes and the lingering scent of charred oak. One by one, the neighbors' lights winked out until only a scattering of porch lamps remained, casting weak circles of yellow on the snow-drowned street. I moved at last, my body heavy but obedient to habit. The kitchen welcomed me with its familiar shadows. My hands worked from memory, setting a bowl on the counter, ladling soup, sliding it into the microwave. The machine hummed dully, its sound a poor imitation of comfort. I didn't even hear it. Not really. My mind was elsewhere, circling, always circling back to Amos's voice, searching, begging for some missed inflection, some hidden softness that might prove I'd misunderstood him. And then an idea. The phone. I could call him back, apologize, take the blame for whatever wrong I had unknowingly done. Maybe if I humbled myself enough, I could mend the crack before it became a canyon. Driven by sudden urgency, I reached into the drawer beneath the counter. The old heavy phone book slid out into my hands. Its pages, yellowed with years, carried the weight of every connection I had ever needed. But as I pulled it free, something else slipped loose, tumbling onto the floor. It was Eleanor's old photo album. The leather cover, once soft and supple, was now cracked and worn, its corners frayed from years of being opened and loved. My hands trembled as I lifted it from the floor, as though the weight of memory itself had settled inside its pages. For a moment I hesitated, afraid of what ghost might step out if I dared to look. Then slowly, reverently, I opened it to the very first page. There he was, Amos at 5 years old. His gap-toothed grin stretched from ear to ear, his small hands clutching a wooden toy airplane, standing proudly beneath our Christmas tree. His pajamas were rumpled from sleep, his dark hair shooting up in every direction, like he had wrestled the night itself. The pure joy radiating from that little boy's face struck me like a blow. My chest ached with it, a hollow pain that no fire could warm. I let my finger hover above the photo, too afraid to touch, as though even the lightest pressure might erase him. I turned the page with care, the crinkle of the plastic protector loud in the silence of the kitchen. And there, Eleanor? Our old kitchen wrapped her in memory's glow. Her auburn hair was dusted with flour, making her look like winter itself had kissed her. She was laughing at something I'd said while rolling out sugar cookie dough, her hands busy, her spirit incandescent. She wore her green dress, the one she pulled out every Christmas Eve, no matter how faded it had grown with the years. It was spotted with flour and sugar, but her smile could have lit every house on our street, brighter than any string of Christmas lights. Eleanor, I whispered, my voice breaking, why did everything have to change? When you were here, we were a family, whole, unshaken. I turned the next page and my breath caught. The three of us together, Eleanor radiant even in her simplicity, holding baby Amos close against her chest. My younger self stood beside her, one arm wrapped around them both, all of us beaming into the camera as though nothing in the world could touch us. We looked invincible then, like time itself would bow to our togetherness. I reached out and traced Eleanor's face with my fingertip, my touch clumsy, my vision blurred. Memories surged up one Christmas morning 15 years ago. Amos thundered down the stairs in his Superman pajamas, his laughter echoing through the house like music. Eleanor was in the kitchen, the smell of her famous cinnamon rolls drifting through the air, and I sat pretending to be surprised by Amos's excitement, though my heart swelled with pride. That morning he begged me to read The Night Before Christmas not once, not twice, but 3 times. He pressed himself against my shoulder, his little hands sticky with melted chocolate, his eyes filled with wonder at every word. When did that wonder die? When did my boy become the cold man whose voice could slice me out of his life with surgical precision? I turned more pages. Each photograph was another knife, each memory a twist deeper into the wound. And then came Eleanor's final Christmas 5 years ago. Cancer had already taken so much from her. Her hands trembled, thin and frail, yet she had insisted on wrapping every gift herself, bow by bow, refusing to surrender tradition to her illness. That year, Amos visited less. He said it was work obligations, endless excuses that I needed to believe. I never pushed, never questioned, because Eleanor's eyes would find mine, silently asking me not to stir conflict. On one of her last lucid days, Eleanor pulled me close, her once bright eyes dulled by morphine but sharpened by fear. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of a command. "Keep the family together, Truman. Promise me you won't let distance grow between you and Amos." And I had promised her. God help me, I had promised. Had I failed her so completely? The question echoed in my chest like a church bell, heavy and unrelenting. The microwave beeped from the kitchen, sharp and insistent, but I let it ring into nothingness. The soup could sit there all night and grow cold, it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore except the frozen fragments of time in that album, moments when we had still been whole, when laughter was effortless and love was unquestioned. 3 separate times my fingers found the phone. 3 times I dialed the first few digits of Amos' number, only to stop my hand shaking as if the receiver itself burned me. What could I possibly say to him? What words could span this canyon that had opened overnight, swallowing everything between us? Words felt too small, too fragile to carry the weight of 30 Christmases of Eleanor's last wish of a father's silent promises. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11:30, each chime tolling like a reminder of time slipping through my hands. I closed the album carefully as though it were made of glass, but before sliding it back into the drawer, I pulled out one photograph. Eleanor in the kitchen, her auburn hair dusted with flour, her laugh frozen forever in a single frame. That photo I placed on my nightstand so that her smile would be the first thing my eyes found when morning broke. Maybe I thought she could still guide me even now toward understanding where I had gone wrong with our son. Undressing for bed felt like a ritual of grief. Eleanor's side of the mattress stretched vast and untouched, as it had for 5 long years, but tonight the emptiness felt cavernous, doubled by the new wound of Amos's absence. I set the alarm clock for 8 old habits from 40 years of labor, refusing to release me, and pulled the covers up to my chin. Through the bedroom window, I watched snow continue to fall steady and relentless. It painted the world outside in white purity, a fleeting perfection that by morning would be trampled into gray slush. Life was like that, I thought, so beautiful in its moment, so quick to lose its shine. Before sliding the album fully into the drawer, I whispered to the darkness, one last trembling question. Where's that little boy? The one who begged me to read him bedtime stories. Morning light arrived, reluctantly filtering through curtains I hadn't bothered to draw back, casting long gray shadows across the rumpled breakfast table. The newspaper lay folded beside a bowl of oatmeal that had cooled into something unappetizing while I distracted myself with the obituary pages. Lately, that section felt less like morbid curiosity and more like preparation, each name and date, another reminder of how close I was to joining them. On the nightstand, Eleanor's photo smiled at me, her flower-dusted laugh reaching across time. But even her smile couldn't ease the iron weight that pressed against my chest. Then the sharp electronic ring of the phone split the silence. I jumped, my spoon clattering against the bowl, hard hammering. After yesterday, every unexpected call felt like an ambush waiting to happen. My hands trembled as I reached for the handset, my eyes darting to the caller ID. And there it was, Amos's name glowing in soft blue letters. For an instant, my heart stuttered, caught between hope and dread, torn by equal measures of longing and fear. With a shaky breath, I lifted the receiver. "Hello." My voice came out cautious, fragile, betraying more than I wanted. "Dad." But this time his voice was different. The sharp edges had softened. There was warmth creeping around the corners of that single word, a warmth I hadn't heard in years. I, I want to apologize for yesterday's call." Amos said, his words halting but sincere. I was completely wrong. Relief didn't just trickle through me, it flooded so sudden and overwhelming that I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. My knees felt weak, as though the very weight of waiting and loneliness had been lifted in a single breath. "Son," I exhaled, my voice trembling, with both joy and disbelief. "I'm so glad you called back. I was worried I'd done something." "No, Dad. You didn't do anything." Amos's voice came quickly, firmly, almost too firmly. "I was stressed about work, and I took it out on the wrong person." His tone carried a rhythm that sent me back decades. It was the same cadence he'd used as a boy, when apologizing for breaking a window with a baseball, or when he tracked mud across Eleanor's freshly mopped kitchen floor. That familiar lilt stirred something tender in me, though the man speaking now was far removed from that messy-haired child. "Violet reminded me how important our family traditions are," he continued, softer this time. "We want you to come for Christmas dinner, after all." The words rushed into me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I couldn't contain myself. "Of course I'll come," I blurted out too quickly, too eagerly. The joy in my chest bubbled like champagne, frothy and unstoppable. "Your mother's turkey recipe, and I'll bring the cranberry sauce." That sounds perfect, Dad," Amos replied. "Bring everything you usually make." For a moment, silence stretched on the line. I shifted my elbow, brushing against my coffee mug, nearly knocking it over. Something in that pause tugged at me. It was too careful, too weighted. Then Amos spoke again. "Violet's really looking forward to it. The kids have been asking about Grandpa Truman's stories." The words were sweet, everything a father longs to hear. Yet beneath the surface, I caught a faint stiffness, like lines recited rather than felt. A performance, perhaps, rather than confession. My chest tightened. "Amos," I asked cautiously, "what made you change your mind so suddenly yesterday? You sounded so certain." There was a beat. Then his words tumbled over mine faster than before, as though he were determined not to leave space for doubt. "Just realized my mistake, that's all. Listen, I need to run work calls. You know how it is. We'll see you Christmas Day around noon." "Wait, son. Can we talk for just, I love you, Dad. See you soon." The line went dead before I could finish my sentence. I sat there holding the phone, staring at it as though its plastic shell might suddenly explain everything, might whisper the truth behind his rushed words. For a brief, fragile moment, pure joy had surged through my veins. Christmas was saved. My family, I thought, restored. Eleanor's fears that distance would grow between father and son banished by a simple call. But the silence that followed was heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. Doubt crept in like icy air, seeping through a cracked window. Something in Amos's voice hadn't sounded like my son. The words were right, the apology carefully placed, but the tone had been hollow, mechanical, as if he were checking off boxes rather than truly mending what had broken. Abruptly, I stood, restless energy carrying me to the kitchen window. Outside, yesterday's snowfall had transformed the yard into a winter wonderland. The world looked clean, untouched, as though sorrow had never existed. Across the street, the Peterson kids were already outside, bundled in bright scarves and mittens, their laughter spilling into the crisp morning air as they packed snow into the round belly of a snowman. Normal families, I thought bitterly. Normal December mornings. Parents and children building something together instead of tearing it apart. Why doesn't this feel normal? The thought pressed at the back of my mind like a persistent ache. I shook my head, muttering to the empty room, to Eleanor's memory that still lingered in the corners of our home. Maybe I'm overthinking this. He apologized. He wants me there. Isn't that what matters? But as I moved through the motions of my morning routine, rinsing last night's coffee mug, dropping the folded newspaper into the recycling bin, stacking dishes into the sink, The unease did not fade. If anything, it grew sharper, like a pebble in a shoe you can't quite shake out. Amos had dodged every attempt I'd made at deeper conversation, his voice hurried, almost fearful, as if I might stumble onto a question he couldn't answer. Afraid of what exactly? What questions would have been so dangerous? I picked up the phone again, my fingers dialing the first 3 digits of his number before I froze. What was I going to say? Son, your apology sounded rehearsed. Why did you hang up so quickly? Can you prove you really want me there? The words sounded bitter, even inside my own head, paranoid and unworthy of a father who should trust his child. With a sigh, I set the receiver down. Instead, I turned toward the kitchen, trying to anchor myself in something practical, something real. Christmas dinner. If nothing else, I would prepare it as Eleanor had always done, with care, with love, with reverence for the traditions that bound us together. The turkey would take hours. The cranberry sauce had to be fresh. Eleanor's stuffing recipe required ingredients I hadn't kept in the pantry since she was alive. I reached for the notepad on the counter, pen poised. But then my hand stopped in midair, a phrase from Amos' call echoing like a bell I hadn't truly heard until now. Violet reminded me how important our family traditions are. Why would Violet need to remind him Amos had grown up in the thick of those traditions? He had lived them every year of his life until Eleanor's passing. He knew them as well as I did. And why had he been so deliberate about mentioning Violet's support, almost as if her approval were the condition for my invitation? Since when did my son need permission from his wife to ask his own father to Christmas dinner? The pen hovered over the blank notepad, unmoving. A cold thread of unease wound deeper into my bones, refusing to let go. The days that followed blurred into a strange mixture of hope and obsession. 3 days, 3 long, restless days of preparation, each one a silent answer to that lingering doubt. On the morning of December 22nd, I woke with a burst of energy I hadn't felt since Eleanor's death. The air seemed lighter, my breath easier, as though the promise of family had reignited something inside me. I found myself humming Christmas carols under my breath as I brewed coffee, the melody trembling, but real. The notepad sat beside my cereal bowl pages, quickly filling with menu plans and shopping lists. Every item was carefully checked, then double-checked, as if perfection could somehow guarantee peace. Turkey, cranberry sauce, Eleanor's stuffing, I muttered, tapping the pen against the worn grooves of the kitchen table. Everything must be just right. This was my chance to prove that family traditions still mattered, that Eleanor's last request hadn't been in vain, that no amount of grief or time could sever the bonds she had fought so hard to preserve. The butcher shop on Maple Street buzzed with holiday shoppers, the air thick with the mingling sense of raw meat and sawdust conversations, weaving over one another in a low roar. I waited patiently in line, watching the glass cases gleam with careful displays, my heart oddly steady with determination. When my turn came, I leaned forward across the counter, meeting the butcher's eyes with the intensity of a man who knew this meal had to be more than food. "I need your finest turkey," I said, my voice lower, firmer than I expected. The butcher, a round-faced man whose white apron bore the honest stains of his trade, gave me a slow smile. "Ah," he said knowingly, bringing the family back together. His words hit me square in the chest, almost enough to bring tears to my eyes. He disappeared behind the counter and returned with a magnificent bird. 22 pounds, plump and unblemished, the kind of turkey you might expect to see, gracing a magazine cover, its skin destined to crisp into golden perfection. I nodded, unable to trust my voice, and handed over the money without haggling. My mind was already racing ahead, already picturing the moment I would carry that bird into Amos's kitchen. A peace offering, a promise, proof that some things tradition love, family could never truly die. December 23rd arrived wrapped in the hum of holiday chaos. The mall pulsed with energy, people moving like schools of fish, darting from one glittering store to the next, arms heavy with glossy bags, faces flushed with the frenzy of last-minute shopping. The music carols piped through loudspeakers, clashed with the chatter of hurried voices and the laughter of children tugging on their parents' sleeves. I wandered through the tide of bodies, feeling both swept along and somehow apart from it all, until I found myself at the toy store. The shelves stretched impossibly high, stacked with every kind of bright plastic invention designed to dazzle. For a moment I stood frozen, overwhelmed by choices, unsure what would make the right impression, what would be remembered. And then my eyes caught at a model airplane kit. A vintage Cessna, its box adorned with clean lines and careful lettering. It pulled me back to the old black and white photo of Amos as a boy holding the wooden plane Eleanor had given him all those years ago. Nostalgia surged like a tide. Yes, this was the one. For Sarah, I chose an art set, its colored pencils nestled in a polished wooden box, arranged like a perfect rainbow waiting to be unlocked. It was a gift of possibilities of imagination, the kind of present Eleanor would have chosen herself. That evening, back in the quiet of my kitchen, I turned to tasks that felt sacred. I went out into my small winter garden, bending down to pluck rosemary and time their woody stems, snapping between my fingers with a satisfying crackle. The cold air bit at my skin, but the familiar sense grounded me. Inside, Eleanor's marinade recipe sat propped against the sugar bowl, her handwriting neat and deliberate as though she had known I would need it one day, when she wasn't here to guide me. Eleanor, I murmured to the photograph on the windowsill, her smile caught forever in a moment of light. I hope I remember this right. It has to be perfect. For Amos, for the children, for us. The marinade came together under my hands. Garlic minced fine rosemary, stripped leaf by leaf thyme, crushed into its earthy perfume. Olive oil poured in a shimmering stream. Finally, I added Eleanor's secret touch, a splash of white wine. The scent rose warm and sharp, filling the kitchen with a memory of holidays long gone. Slipping my hands beneath the cool skin of the turkey, I massaged the paste carefully, almost reverently, as though I were enacting an ancient ritual, a spell meant to bind a broken family back together. Christmas Eve dawned gray and brittle, the kind of cold that seeps into the bones. Yet my spirit soared with determination. I wrapped each gift with a soldier's precision, folding corners, so crisp they could cut pulling ribbons taut and tying them into neat bows. My best Christmas shirt hung pressed and ready the fabric, holding the faint scent of starch and memory. Before the mirror, I dabbed cologne behind my ears, the gesture small but deliberate, like a knight fastening the last piece of his armor before battle. But as the day stretched toward evening, the optimism began to fray. Doubt crept in quiet as fog sliding under a door. Amos hadn't called. Not a word to confirm the details. What time should I arrive? Should I bring wine? Did the children have any new food allergies I should know about? My phone lay silent on the counter, its dark screen reflecting my own anxious glances. Each unanswered second sharpening the edge of my unease. I was scrubbing marinade bowls when movement at the window startled me. Frank Larson, my neighbor, leaned in slightly, his weathered face creased with curiosity. "Big plans tomorrow." Truman, he called through the glass, his voice warm familiar. I straightened, wiping my hands quickly on a dish towel. "Christmas dinner with Amos and his family." I answered perhaps too quickly, the words rushing out like I had rehearsed them. "We're going to be a real family again." Something flickered across Frank's expression, something brief, almost hidden, but enough for me to notice. He gave a slow nod, a kind smile. "That's wonderful. You deserve happiness." After he left, silence settled heavily around me. His question replayed in my mind over and over, refusing to let go. There had been weight behind it, something beyond the easy interest of a neighbor. I stood staring out at the fading light, wondering why his approval had felt more like caution than celebration. But I pushed the thought away, forcing it back into the shadows of my mind. My eyes lingered instead on the golden turkey, resting proudly in the refrigerator, its skin marinated and waiting for the final triumph of the oven. Nearby, the carefully wrapped gifts stood like obedient soldiers by the door ribbons, glinting faintly in the lamplight. Everything was ready, everything in place, a tableau of preparation and hope. Everything except for the storm inside my chest. My heart pounded restlessly, racing as though it were searching for dangers in a room that held none. Why hadn't Amos called? Why did Frank's eyes, kind as they were, carry that flicker of concern when I told him of my plans? And why deep down did this long-awaited reunion feel like I was stepping onto a stage rehearsing lines for a performance, rather than walking into a homecoming? These questions gnawed at me, refusing to be silenced, no matter how many times I told myself to let them go. By the time I crawled into bed on Christmas Eve, the house around me lay still and silent. Yet my mind raced louder than the winter wind rattling at the windows. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, Thoughts circling endlessly, whispering fears I tried to smother. Anticipation always brought anxiety, I told myself again and again. Tomorrow would be perfect. It had to be. Christmas was a day for miracles, and I clung to that hope as fiercely as a drowning man clings to driftwood. Christmas morning arrived crisp and dazzling, the neighborhood dressed in winter's finest. Snow blanketed the roofs and lawns, sparkling like diamonds scattered carelessly by some unseen hand. The light was pure, almost blinding, and for a moment it felt like the world itself was blessing my day with radiance. I dressed with ceremonial care, each movement deliberate. The shirt freshly pressed, the tie knotted twice until it lay just right. At the mirror, I smoothed down stubborn strands of hair, the ritual feeling both mundane and strangely sacred. I wanted Amos to see not just his father, but a man who still had dignity, who still belonged. When I lifted the turkey carrier, it felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried not only the bird, but also the weight of all my unspoken hopes. I loaded it gently into the car alongside the gift bags, their bows trembling faintly in the draft of cold air. At the front door, key in hand, I hesitated. I turned back to look at the house, the familiar windows frosted over the empty rooms beyond, waiting in their stillness for my return. It struck me suddenly how hollow the place looked, without voices, without laughter. A chill traveled my spine, uninvited and unsettling, but I shook it off. Today was about family. Today was about healing. I locked the door with a firm twist, refusing to give that shadow of doubt any more ground. The drive was short, but each crunch of the tires against the icy driveway felt like a drumbeat leading me into battle. Amos' house rose before me, glowing with festivity. Christmas lights traced every edge of window and door frame, a picture-perfect postcard scene. For a moment my chest tightened, not with dread this time, but with a fragile, aching hope. I maneuvered the turkey carrier and the bags out of the car, the cold air biting my cheeks, painting them with a sharp flush. My breath came in pale clouds as I climbed the steps, every movement deliberate, every step echoing with the silent prayer that today would mend what had been broken. Before I could lift my hand to knock, the front door swung open. Violet stood there, framed in light, her warm smile shining against the backdrop of holiday cheer. A dusting of flour clung to her red sweater, soft and white, like confectioner's sugar, evidence of the feast she had been creating within. "Truman, we're so glad you're here," she said, her voice as welcoming as the glow of the hearth behind her. "Come in, before you freeze." The moment I stepped inside, the house embraced me with warmth. The scent of cinnamon and pine wove together, rich and nostalgic, wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. Holiday music drifted faintly from unseen speakers, while Christmas lights scattered soft rainbow shadows across polished hardwood floors. And then, as if conjured by the magic of the day, Timmy appeared at my elbow, his eyes bright, his energy barely contained. He bounced on his toes, his excitement radiating in every movement, as though my arrival had made his Christmas complete. "Grandpa Truman, did you bring presents? Can we open them now?" Timmy's voice rang out like a bell, high and urgent, his eyes shining with the boundless anticipation only a child could summon. He tugged eagerly at my sleeve, already bouncing, as though the answer might release a flood of joy. Timmy, Violet chided gently, her laugh soft as snow falling on pine needles. "We agreed you'd wait. Let your grandfather get settled first." She stepped forward to rescue me, lifting the heavy turkey carrier from my stiff, half-frozen hands. "Good heavens, Truman, this thing weighs a ton." "What on earth did you do to it?" I unwound my scarf, slowly, cheeks still tingling from the cold, and answered with a touch of pride. "Eleanor's secret marinade," I said. The words tasted bittersweet on my tongue, her name always carried like a prayer. 24 hours of garlic, rosemary, and patience. That's all. From the corner, Sarah peeked shyly around the doorway, her small fingers clutching the wood as though the frame itself were her shield. Her wide eyes studied me with cautious curiosity, and when I smiled, she ducked away only to peek out again a heartbeat later. The kitchen door swung wider, and Martha Harrington emerged, wiping her hands on a dish towel, dotted with cheerful reindeer dancing across the fabric. Her eyes lit up the moment they landed on the turkey carrier. "Good heavens, Truman," she exclaimed, her voice warm with admiration. "This turkey is absolutely magnificent. You must share Eleanor's secret with me. I've been serving the same bland bird for 30 years. I chuckled softly, setting my scarf aside, and replied, The secret is time. That's all. Eleanor always said good things can't be rushed. As I spoke, Walter appeared at Martha's side, his handshake firm, his nod brusque but approving. For a moment their presence anchored me, neighbors, friends' faces of familiarity that softened the strangeness of the day. Then Amos stepped into view. My son. He came last, adjusting his tie with movements that were too precise, too measured, like a man playing a role he hadn't quite mastered. His smile rose dutifully to his mouth, but it faltered before reaching his eyes. Thanks for coming, Dad, he said, his tone polite, rehearsed, almost brittle. This means everything to us. Something in the cadence of his words unsettled me enough that I found myself studying him more closely, the way his shoulders held tension, the faint tremor in his voice. But before I could linger, Timmy seized my hand with youthful impatience. Come on, Grandpa, he chirped, tugging me toward the dining room, his excitement dissolving the moment like sunlight breaking through clouds. The dining table gleamed beneath the soft glow of candlelight. Violet's best china caught the flicker of flame, every plate polished to a shine, each cloth napkin folded into crisp triangles. My turkey rested in the center of it all, its golden skin glistening beneath the chandelier, as though brushed with liquid amber. Would you carve, Truman? Violet asked, pressing the electric knife gently into my hand. Her eyes softened. You're the artist here. I inhaled, steadying myself, and set to work. The blade slid easily through the fragrant crust, releasing tender slices that practically melted away from the bone. Garlic and rosemary filled the air, weaving into the melody of appreciative murmurs that rose from around the table. Dinner unfolded with the warmth of tradition. Walter asked me about my retirement projects, his tone half curious, half envious. Martha, still marveling at the turkey, praised every dish I had prepared. The children's chatter bubbled like champagne school stories. Friends, the endless whirl of little lives unfolding. Even Amos, stiff as he was, at first seemed to loosen. He leaned back, laughed lightly, and shared a story about work. His voice had all the right inflections, his words smooth, almost natural. Almost. But I noticed things. The way his hand slipped toward his watch, checking it when he thought no one was watching. How he flinched almost imperceptibly when someone's phone buzzed with notifications. His laughter rang in the room, bright enough to fool most, but in my ears it echoed strangely, hollow, empty, like a bell that had lost its tone. Grandpa Sarah's small voice pulled me back. She leaned forward over her cranberry sauce, her eyes shy but hopeful. Can we open presents now? Please, 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 Timmy chimed in, bouncing wildly in his chair, until Violet's hand came to rest gently on his shoulder, anchoring him with a mother's quiet command. The gift exchange unfolded in the living room, the heart of the house glowing with the warmth of Christmas lights strung along the mantel, and a tree heavy with ornaments collected over decades. Wrapping paper flew like confetti in the hands of eager children, tumbling across the carpet until it looked as though a rainbow had melted there. Bright scraps scattered like colorful snowflakes. Timmy tore through his package with the fierce joy only a boy his age could muster. When the final layer of paper fell away, his eyes widened, his whole face alight as he held up the box. A model airplane, a Cessna just like the ones he had seen at the summer air, showed the memory still fresh in his mind. Grandpa, can we build it together? He asked, his small hands already tracing the edges of the box, as though he could will the pieces into life. Of course, I said, and the answer came as easily as breathing. A warmth spread through my chest, deep and steady, the kind of warmth no fire could provide. That's what grandfathers are for. Across the room, Sarah had opened her gift, more carefully peeling the tape, as though preserving the wrapping were part of the magic. When she finally lifted the lid of the box, her breath caught softly. An art set. Dozens of colored pencils gleamed inside a polished wooden case, their sharpened tips shining like tiny jewels. She hugged the box close to her chest, her eyes already dreaming of blank pages. I'm going to draw our whole family, she said solemnly, her voice carrying a weight far older than her years. She looked up at me, eyes steady. Even great-grandma Eleanor, so she can be with us too. The room stilled. Laughter and chatter faded into silence, replaced by something tender, fragile, and reverent. Eleanor's absence filled the air in that moment, not sharp or jagged, as it had been in the early years, but soft, almost comforting, like she had simply taken her seat among us again, invisible but felt. She would have loved that I said quietly, my voice rougher than I intended, as though the words had scraped their way out. And I believed it, truly. Evening slipped in, gently wrapping the house in a calm glow. The warmth of dinner still lingered, like a heavy blanket draped over us all. Walter and I drifted into conversation about baseball old rivalries and players long retired, while Martha clattered dishes in the kitchen alongside Violet, their voices rising and falling in the familiar rhythm of shared chores. The children sprawled on the carpet with their new treasures, Timmy already planning how to assemble his plane. Sarah laying her colored pencils in neat rows, as if arranging soldiers before battle. Their giggles and chatter filled the background, a sweet soundtrack that tied generations together. I leaned back in the armchair. Violet had proudly called Grandpa's spot, loosening my tie. Letting out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Contentment seeped into my bones, the kind I hadn't felt in months, perhaps years. This, I thought, is what Christmas is meant to be. Family gathered, close traditions, honored love, stitched across the seams of time. That was when my phone began to vibrate against my chest. A gentle buzz, at first barely noticeable under the layers of jacket and shirt, almost like a small reminder from another world. I ignored it. Nothing outside this room could matter compared to the perfection of this night. But then it buzzed again, harder, more insistent, like a fly trapped beneath glass. I sighed, catching Walter mid-story about his grandson's batting average. "Excuse me for just a moment," I said, patting his shoulder as I rose. He nodded, still grinning, already preparing his next anecdote. The narrow powder room off the main hallway gave me privacy. I closed the door, and the muffled sounds of laughter, clinking dishes, and children's play faded into a cocoon of silence. I pulled the phone from my pocket. Unknown number. I nearly dismissed it, after all. Who calls on Christmas night except salesmen or scam artists? But when the screen went dark, only to light up again immediately with the same number, my irritation outweighed my caution. I swiped, lifted it to my ear. "Hello. Who is this calling on Christmas night?" The reply came instantly, slicing through pleasantries with the sharpness of a blade through wrapping paper. "You need to get home immediately." The voice was male, urgent, unfamiliar. I blinked hard at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror, the dim light above the sink casting tired shadows across my face. My expression shifted slowly. First irritation, then confusion, then something heavier. I could almost watch the emotions settle into my features, as if they were being etched there by an unseen hand. "Who is this? What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended, tight with impatience. The reply came quick, urgent, and merciless. "That doesn't matter right now. Just go home." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles blanched. Behind the thin wooden bathroom door, life went on as if nothing had changed. Timmy's high, excited voice explaining the parts of his model airplane, to his grandmother the cheerful clink of dishes being stacked in the kitchen, bursts of laughter rising and falling like music. Normal Christmas evening sounds. And yet in that instant they all felt impossibly far away, as though I were listening to them through layers of glass and fog. "I don't understand what you're saying. What's happening?" My words stumbled out, half demand, half plea. "Trust me and go now." Then silence. The line went dead. The flat, final click echoed in my ear like a door slamming shut. I lowered the phone, staring at it as if it might somehow explain itself. My reflection stared back from the mirror, older than I remembered, worry lines cut deep into my forehead, shadows beneath my eyes. The voice hadn't sounded like a scammer. It hadn't carried that hollow, rehearsed cadence I'd heard from telemarketers so many times before. No, this voice had weight, conviction, urgency that had burrowed under my skin and left my chest tight with unease. What could be wrong at home? My mind grasped at possibilities. Fire, a break-in? Had I left the stove on a candle, burning something waiting to spark disaster? Each scenario flashed across my imagination like photographs blurring together with sickening speed. But this was Christmas, my first true family Christmas in 5 long years. How could I just get up and leave? Violet would be alarmed. The children would be confused, maybe even hurt. And Amos would think I was looking for excuses again, retreating from the fragile bridge We'd only just begun to rebuild. The phone weighed heavy in my hands, far heavier than a small object of glass and metal had any right to. Logic whispered that it was nothing. A wrong number. A prank. A stranger misdialing with some imagined urgency. But something in the caller's tone, sharp, unyielding, had cut straight through the armor of reason. I checked the number again. Still unfamiliar. No name. No voicemail. No follow-up text. Just that stark, unnerving command. Go home immediately. Through the bathroom door, I heard Amos laugh at something Walter had said. The sound carried strangely too bright, too sharp like laughter in the wrong key. Had he noticed my absence yet? Was he glancing at his watch, wondering why I was taking so long in here? My reflection wavered as the Christmas lights from the hallway flickered through the frosted glass painting. Red and green shadows across my face. The voice echoed in my mind, insistent as a drumbeat. Trust me and go now. Trust who, why, what possible emergency could justify this intrusion, this urgency, this shadow cast over an otherwise perfect evening? And yet, even as questions multiplied, some older, deeper instinct had already decided for me. My shoulders had stiffened, my pulse had quickened, my breathing was shallow, ragged. Every nerve screamed a warning that my rational brain could not explain away. Some primitive part of me knew this wasn't random. This wasn't meaningless. I pictured my house sitting empty, its darkened windows, watching the December night doors locked against the cold and against whatever else might be waiting. What if someone was inside now pawing through my belongings? What if water was flooding the basement or fire creeping along the walls? What if, Dad, you okay in there? Amos's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts, muffled but clear, laced with concern. The timing nearly made me jump. Just a minute, I called back, forcing steadiness into my tone, though my hands trembled. I looked at myself once more in the mirror, at the tightness around my mouth, the worry carved into my eyes. The stranger's urgency clung to me like a second skin, impossible to shake. I drew a long breath as though bracing for a plunge into icy water. My fingers closed around the brass doorknob, cold and unyielding, beneath my touch. The tremor in my hand betrayed me, but my resolve was set. Whatever explanation I gave my family would have to suffice, because I knew with a certainty I couldn't rationalize away something was waiting for me at home, and I couldn't ignore it. Whatever was happening at my house couldn't possibly wait for coffee and dessert. That certainty pressed against my chest like a stone, leaving no room for hesitation. My hand trembled as I reached for the bathroom doorknob, the cold brass slick against my damp palm. In my head, the stranger's voice still reverberated, urgent and insistent, as if it had carved itself into the walls of my skull. Beyond the door, the world carried on, warm and oblivious. The sounds that had felt like comfort an hour earlier now struck me as strangely alien. The lilting laughter of children, the murmur of adults in easy conversation, the clink of cups, and the low hum of Christmas cheer, all of it suddenly belonged to another life. One I felt myself drifting away from, even as it happened around me. The glow of Christmas lights that had seemed so inviting when I first walked in now looked theatrical, too soft, too staged, like decorations in a play I no longer had a part in. "Everything okay, Dad?" Amos's voice cut through the haze as soon as I stepped into the living room. He looked up from his conversation with Walter, his face composed, yet behind his eyes something flickered. Concern, calculation. I couldn't tell. Maybe both. "I need to go home." The words escaped sharper than I intended, slicing the room's atmosphere in two, as jarring as tearing wrapping paper mid-laughter. For a moment, no one moved. Then Violet appeared at my elbow, wiping her hands nervously on the dish towel. She still clutched the scent of apple pie, clinging faintly to her clothes. "Home. But we haven't even had dessert yet," she said, her voice trembling between disappointment and alarm. "I made your favorite apple pie. There's an emergency." The explanation tumbled out, raw, clipped, rushed. I lunged for the closet, grabbing my coat with jerky, impatient movements. Someone called. "Something's wrong at the house." The room fell into uneasy silence. Even Timmy, usually lost in his world, slowed his game of zooming the toy airplane between chair legs. Its mechanical whoosh, the only sound still daring to move through the quiet. Sarah looked up from her new set of colored pencils, her little hands frozen mid-doodle, the rainbow scattering of them across the table, suddenly fragile in its innocence. "What kind of emergency?" she asked, her small voice brimming with confusion. Walter leaned back in his chair, brow furrowed, deep with suspicion, the kind of suspicion only years of experience can sharpen. "Strange timing," he muttered, his tone low but pointed. "I don't know yet." My fingers fumbled clumsily at the buttons of my coat, as though even muscle memory had deserted me under the weight of the moment. "They just said I needed to get home immediately." Amos pushed his chair back, rising slowly, his movements deliberate. His expression was etched with concern, confusion, maybe both, but behind it lingered something else I couldn't name. His eyes locked onto mine a second too long, his attention sharp-focused, as though weighing me rather than the situation. "Who called?" he asked finally. "And why didn't they explain what was wrong?" For a heartbeat I studied his face as though the answer might be hiding there. His worry looked genuine. His tone rang true, but beneath it all, something in his gaze felt layered, unreadable. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he wasn't saying mattered more than what he was. "I have to go," I said simply. My voice steadier now, the decision carved in stone. I bent down and kissed each of the children goodbye. Their wide, bewildered eyes searched my face, searching for an explanation I couldn't give. Innocence stared back at me, puzzled and fragile. My throat tightened. "Thank you for a wonderful Christmas dinner," I told them, my words clumsy but sincere. "I'm sorry to leave like this." The door opened and the cold December air struck me instantly, sharp as a slap. It stole the warmth from my skin and filled my lungs with urgency. I stepped into the night, their voices following me, a chorus of confusion and concern trailing into the dark. My car sat waiting, its windows frosted, its engine reluctant. When I turned the key, the starter groaned, resisting the sudden demand for action after hours in the freezing stillness. Finally, with a sputter, it came to life, coughing smoke into the night. My hands clung to the wheel knuckles, white, as though bracing for whatever waited at home. And in my chest, that voice still pulsed like a drumbeat. "Trust me and go now." I backed out too fast, too carelessly. The tires spat gravel as the car lurched into the street, my bumper missing Amos' mailbox by mere inches. My chest tightened at the near miss, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Through the rearview mirror, the scene behind me etched itself into memory like a photograph I hadn't asked to take. They were all clustered in the doorway, framed by the golden glow spilling out from the house. Violet hugged herself against the cold, her dish towel still draped, forgotten, in one hand. Walter stood beside her, head shaking slowly, the heavy gesture of a man convinced he understood more than he was saying. The children pressed their faces against the window panes, wide-eyed and silent, their small hands fogging the glass. And Amos stood apart. Not in the doorway, not near the others, but off to the side, his tall figure a dark silhouette outlined by the warm light. Motionless. Watching. I tore my eyes from the mirror and gripped the wheel tighter. The suburban streets stretched out before me in a ribbon of emptiness. Every house I passed was dressed in Christmas cheer strings of colored lights winking like distant stars against the dark. I caught fleeting glimpses through uncovered windows, families gathered around glowing trees, laughter spilling into rooms as gifts were unwrapped, the kind of tableau that should have felt comforting. Instead, it seemed like another world, unreachable, unreal. The radio crackled with Silent Night, soft and reverent, but nothing about this night was silent. Nothing felt holy. My knuckles whitened against the steering wheel tendons, straining as though I could anchor myself to something solid through sheer force of grip. And through it all, that voice kept replaying in my mind, "Trust me and go now," over and over, like a drumbeat I couldn't silence. But trust who and why? What could possibly be waiting for me at home with such urgency? The speedometer crept higher, the needle climbing past the limit. Empty intersections blurred past as I pressed harder on the gas, each yellow light becoming an unspoken dare. I ran one, then another. Logic tried to intervene. "You're being reckless. You're imagining shadows where none exist," but instinct screamed louder, primal and unyielding danger. "Hurry, get home!" My mind scrambled for explanations. A fire, a stove left on a space heater sparking, but I had been so careful, double-checking every corner before I left, making sure the house was ready, safe, perfect for my return. Unless someone else had entered. The thought cut through me like ice water, chilling me from the inside out. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator. Yes, that had to be it. A break-in. It made sense. A house sitting dark and empty on Christmas night, what better target? The perfect chance for someone to slip inside while the owner enjoyed dinner elsewhere. Easy pickings. But then the questions twisted tighter. How would a stranger know where I was? How would they know my phone number? How could they know to call me at that moment? My thoughts circled back unbidden to Amos. The way he'd checked his watch during dinner, his laughter that hadn't rung quite true. The fleeting look, was it relief when I'd announced I was leaving? Was I weaving connections out of nothing but nerves? Or had my son, my own flesh and blood, been almost eager to see me go? The suspicion shamed me even as it grew. A father was supposed to trust his child, not pick apart glances and gestures for hidden meanings. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and with every passing mile it rooted deeper, spreading, tangling with my fear, until it was impossible to separate one from the other. By the time I turned into my neighborhood, my pulse was a pounding drumbeat in my ears. The streets were eerily still, curtains drawn tight, driveways empty. Christmas night in suburbia, every family gathered inside, shut off from the world. Perfect conditions for crime to move unnoticed. And then my house. It sat in silence at the end of the street, dark and still exactly as I had left it. But something was wrong, subtle, invisible, yet undeniable. A wrongness that prickled across my skin, setting every nerve on edge before I could even pinpoint why. I didn't pull into the driveway. Some buried instinct urged me otherwise. Instead, I eased the car into the shadow of Frank Larson's oak tree, tucking it out of sight. Stealth over convenience. My breath misted the windshield as I sat there for a heartbeat, staring at the dark outline of my home. And every sense I had screamed the same thing: you're not alone. The engine gave a few sharp ticks as it cooled the sound, unnervingly loud in the crystalline silence of the night. When I pushed open the car door, a blast of cold air struck my face, sharp as needles, making my lungs ache with every breath. My senses sharpened instantly, as if my body knew before my mind did that I was stepping into danger. The street was the same one I'd walked 1,000 times, yet tonight it looked altered, warped by fear. Every shadow pooled darker, every tree branch seemed to bend with suspicion, every harmless garden ornament felt like it could conceal an intruder. Even the air itself seemed thinner, tighter, stretched taut over the neighborhood. My house sat at the end of the street, a dark outline beneath the glittering stars, crouched low, like something waiting to pounce. And then I saw it. The wrongness. A basement window, small and square, one I knew by heart, because I'd caulked its edges myself last spring. Tonight it showed no reflection, no faint gleam from the street lamp across the road. Instead, it was a hollow square of blackness. Below it, the snow glittered with something unnatural, shards of broken glass scattered across the ground like cruel diamonds. My chest seized. Someone was inside. Now. I dropped into a crouch, my breath puffing white in front of me, and fumbled for my phone with clumsy, numb fingers. The device slipped once before I managed to punch in the numbers. My voice came out ragged when the operator answered. 911. What's your emergency? There's someone in my house, I whispered, pressing myself against Frank Larson's wooden fence for cover. My eyes never left the dark outline of my home. A beam of light suddenly cut through an upstairs window, my bedroom window. It swept slowly, deliberately illuminating Eleanor's curtains before vanishing again. Then it reappeared in the corner, steady, calm. Whoever was inside wasn't panicked. They weren't grabbing what they could and running. They were searching. The operator's voice crackled in my ear. Sir, what's your address? Are you in a safe location? I rattled off my street number, each syllable clipped with urgency, my gaze still locked on the moving light. I'm outside. They broke in through the basement window. I can see them moving around. Officers are on their way. Please stay away from the house until they arrive. Stay away. While some stranger rifled through the place Eleanor and I had poured our lives into, while they pawed through our memories, our papers, her jewelry, everything sacred, the thought stabbed deeper than any weapon could. How long until police get here? I hissed. Approximately 10 to 15 minutes, sir. Please remain at a safe distance. 10 to 15 minutes. My heart sank. That wasn't a short wait. That was a lifetime. More than enough time for a thief to strip the house bare to take everything valuable and disappear into the night like smoke. I ended the call, frustration boiling under my skin, and hurried back to the trunk of my car. My hands shook violently as I rummaged through forgotten emergency supplies, loose tools, a coil of jumper cables. Then my fingers closed around something cold and solid. Metal. A tire iron left over from changing a flat tire last spring. I pulled it out, the weight heavy and reassuring in my grip. Primitive, yes. But it was something. And at that moment, it was enough. Whoever was inside my home would not find me helpless. I moved slowly, circling the perimeter of the house, using the cover of snow-draped bushes and gaudy Christmas decorations. The inflatable Santa at the Petersons' yard bobbed faintly in the wind, a grotesque witness to my silent advance. My boots sank into the snow with muted crunches, each step deliberate, measured. When I reached the basement window, the scene told its story without words. Jagged shards of glass jutted inward like broken teeth. Snow had been dragged inside, footprints muddied the sill where someone had crawled through. The certainty of violation settled heavy in my gut. Above me, the flashlight beam shifted again, sweeping across my bedroom. It lingered at the dresser, right where Eleanor's jewelry box sat. Then it glided toward the closet, the one where I kept files, documents, insurance papers. This wasn't random. This wasn't desperation. Whoever was up there wasn't looking for loose cash or trinkets. They had a purpose. They were hunting for something specific. A surge of heat rose through me, overpowering the cold night air. My hands clenched tighter around the tire iron until my knuckles ached. It wasn't fear now, it was fury. A raw, protective rage that burned through every nerve. Whoever had chosen this house this night, this violation, would discover they had walked into far more resistance than they had bargained for. This was my house, my sanctuary. The walls that had heard my laughter, my arguments, my quiet prayers in the dead of night. The place where Eleanor and I had poured 40 years of sweat, love, and sacrifice, and now some criminal thought they could crawl inside and tear it apart like it was nothing more than a storage unit to be looted. The thought burned through me, hot and poisonous. I pressed myself into the shadows beside the broken basement window, the cold brick biting into my back. My ears strained for every sound drifting from inside. Above me, the groan of floorboards betrayed movement, steady, deliberate. Someone was inside, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't stumbling around in panic. They were combing through the rooms with purpose, through spaces that had held our anniversaries, Christmas mornings, Eleanor's laughter. A thin beam of light swept across a window, then another. Back and forth, slow, precise, like a lighthouse beam, warning sailors of hidden rocks. Always searching, always deliberate. But what were they looking for? Loose cash, jewelry, electronics? Or was it something more pointed, more personal, something they knew was here? The question gnawed at me, feeding my anger, until my breath came out in ragged, steaming bursts that fogged the winter air. The footsteps shifted, no longer above me. They creaked down the stairs closer toward the basement, toward me. Every muscle in my body tightened, coiled like a spring, the tire iron slick in my frozen grip. My pulse thundered so loud I was sure they would hear it. One wrong move, and this wouldn't be about burglary anymore. This would be about survival. The basement light flickered on. A pale glow leaked from the edges of the curtains. Then it flicked off again. Cautious, calculating. Whoever was in there wasn't stupid, but they weren't cautious enough to imagine I was waiting for them in the dark, pressed tight against the foundation like a hunter waiting for prey. The sounds inside shifted again. Papers rustling, drawers opening, the dull scrape of wood against concrete as a chair moved. My stomach clenched, hard bile rising in my throat. Those weren't just papers. Those were our papers. Tax returns, love letters, property deeds. Letters from Eleanor's doctor. Fragments of a life painstakingly built over decades now being pawed through by dirty, careless hands. How dare they? How dare some faceless thief violate my wife's memory, my life's work, as if it were all just garbage to be sorted, stolen, and stuffed into a bag. Rage swelled in my chest so strong it felt almost blinding. The searching went on, unhurried, confident. Whoever was inside believed they had time, believed the police were still far away, believed this house was theirs for the taking. They were wrong. Dead wrong. The flashlight beam shifted again, nearing the window. The glow stretched across the snow-covered yard, throwing shadows long and sharp. My breath froze in my chest. The moment had come. First, a bag emerged from the window. A dark canvas sack bulging with papers and small objects my life reduced to stolen cargo. Then a leg sliding carefully through the jagged teeth of the broken glass. The intruder moved with the steady confidence of someone who had done this before testing the frame, before committing to the exit. I raised the tire iron higher, my knuckles white, every muscle taut. The cold and adrenaline made my arms tremble, but the rage rooted me steady. A torso followed. Shoulders. The intruder pulled themselves up, crouching in my yard. And then the flashlight beam caught their face. My stomach turned to stone. My heart stopped cold. Alton Reed. The recognition hit me like a sledgehammer, sickening and undeniable. A man I knew. A man I trusted enough to let near my life. Now standing in my backyard on Christmas night, clutching a canvas bag fat with the intimate pieces of my world, utterly unaware he wasn't alone. Alton. I stepped out from the shadows, the tire iron raised high, my voice ripping through the frozen night like the crack of a whip. Alton spun around so violently he nearly lost his footing on the snow-slick ground. The canvas bag tore free from his grip and crashed into the drifts with a muffled thud. Papers burst into the air, scattering like grotesque confetti across the white lawn. Legal documents, bank statements, pieces of Eleanor's will. Each sheet a shard of my life laid bare under the winter moon. His face drained of blood. In the faint glow of the neighboring houses, he looked like a man caught between guilt and terror, as pale and fragile as the snow under his boots. "Truman," he stammered, voice cracking. "I didn't want to. This wasn't my idea." Then whose idea was it? My words were low, venomous, each syllable trembling with the force of my fury. I advanced slowly, the tire iron heavy in my hands, less a tool than a judgment ready to be delivered. At his feet lay the evidence of his crime. Documents I knew by heart, even in the dim light. Eleanor's will, our bank statements, stock certificates carefully preserved like holy relics of a lifetime's work. Alton lifted his hands, retreating until his back pressed against the cold brick of my home. He had nowhere left to go. "He said you'd be at dinner for hours," Alton blurted out, panic spilling into every word. "He swore you'd never know." But even before the words finished tumbling from his mouth, an icy realization spread through me. My heart clenched as if frozen solid. I already knew the answer. Amos. His name fell from my lips, bitter and broken. Alton's eyes flickered with shame. He planned it. The whole Christmas dinner, the apologies, the reunion, it was all just a cover, a distraction. The tire iron slipped from my fingers as though my body itself could no longer carry the weight of this truth. It struck the snow with a dull final thud. My son, my own flesh and blood. "My son sent you," I whispered hoarsely. Alton nodded miserably. His breath steamed in the cold as tears carved lines down his face. He needed Eleanor's will, the Boeing stock certificates. He said you were going to give it all away to charity, not to family. Each word landed like a hammer blow. My knees buckled. I staggered back, my gaze fixed on the papers splayed in the snow. Eleanor's careful handwriting on legal documents, the signatures we had made together, believing they would protect the life we'd built. And now they were nothing more than plunder for a desperate man. The dinner I rasped, barely able to form the words. The apology, the invitation. My chest heaved with betrayal. It was all fake. "He's desperate," Truman Alton said quickly, dropping to his knees, fumbling to scoop up the scattered documents with trembling hands. "The debts, the gambling, the bad investments. He owes people who don't forgive late payments." I swayed on my feet as if struck. My son who had sat across from me just hours ago smiling, raising a glass. Who had let his children climb into my lap, who had accepted my food, my gifts, my forgiveness, while knowing all along that his friend was gutting my home like a carcass. How much I forced out my throat raw. Alton's voice came in a whisper so faint I almost didn't hear. "Close to 200,000. He found out about the Boeing stock from Eleanor's estate papers. Said it was family money anyway. Said, you'd understand. Family money. The phrase seared me worse than any blade. Eleanor's legacy, her life's devotion, reduced to a gambling debt repayment. The stocks she had bought carefully, patiently, penny by penny, dollar by dollar from her teacher's salary. 30 years of sacrifice. 30 years of faith in me and us. My hands shook as I bent to pick up one of the scattered certificates. Eleanor's name was printed across the top in elegant script, as if she herself were watching me from the past. $2.3 million in Boeing stock. Purchased decades ago when the company had been struggling, when no one else believed. She had believed. She had trusted me to guard her sacrifices. And now, her son had tried to steal it. Her nest egg for our retirement. The quiet security Eleanor had so carefully built over decades, a safety net against an uncertain future, a shield for the twilight of our lives. And Amos, my own son, had planned to gamble it away as if it were nothing more than spare change. Alton's head drooped, his breath puffing into the cold air like smoke. He no longer bothered to gather the scattered papers. His voice came out, broken, trembling. He said, "You'd never miss it. That, old people don't need that much money anyway." Those words, that casual cruelty, they struck deeper than any knife could. To dismiss 68 years of life and love, to reduce Eleanor's memory, her sacrifices, her hopes, her unshakable faith in me, to a pile of papers worth stealing. Something inside me fractured in that moment, the soundless shattering of a frozen pond, cracking under unbearable weight. My eyes swept from Alton, pathetic and crumpled in the snow, to the papers littering the ground like violated relics, to the basement window, broken, jagged, gaping like a wound, carved into the very bones of my home. That window was more than shattered glass. It was the symbol of everything I had lost tonight: trust, family, the fragile possibility of reconciliation with my son. All of it crushed under greed and desperation. Then my phone rang. Its sharp synthetic tones split the night, shrill and jarring against the heavy silence. I looked down at the screen. The name glowed there like poison. Amos. "He's probably wondering why you left dinner early," Alton muttered miserably, his voice scraping like gravel. "He's going to be so angry I got caught." I stared at the glowing name, my thumb hovering just above the answer button. It was such a small gesture, just the tap of a finger, and yet it carried the weight of a lifetime. What would I hear if I answered more lies, more manipulation, or perhaps the cold confirmation of everything I already knew, that my son had betrayed me beyond repair? Behind me, sirens rose in the distance, faint at first, then swelling louder, closer. Their wail cut through the night like an approaching storm. Red and blue lights flashed against the bare tree branches, flickering like some grotesque parody of Christmas decorations. The phone kept ringing insistently, mercilessly. Each tone was a demand, an accusation, a reminder that blood ties could twist into shackles when poisoned by greed. Alton remained on the ground, his arms wrapped tight around himself, his words still echoing in the cold air, like a confession to the dark. Before us, Eleanor's will lay half buried in the snow, its ink smudged but still legible, her handwriting careful and steady, a voice from the grave that deserved more honor than this night had given it. Then headlights swept across my yard, searing the scene into clarity. 2 police cruisers pulled up, tires crunching against frozen gravel. Doors opened in practiced unison, and officers emerged, steady, precise, radiating that quiet authority honed by years of walking into chaos. One approached me, his badge glinting with reflected Christmas lights from a neighbor's porch. His voice was calm but firm. "Sir, are you the homeowner who called 911? I straightened, still clutching the damp pages of Eleanor's will against my chest like a sacred text. "Truman Dixon. This is my house." And that man, my voice hardened as I pointed to Alton, broke into it. Alton lifted his trembling hands higher, as though surrendering to an entire army rather than just 2 suburban officers. The second officer moved in efficiently, beginning the ritual of cuffs and rights. The metallic click of steel around Alton's wrists echoed like punctuation to this nightmare. The first officer turned his focus to me. "What was stolen, Mr. Dixon?" I glanced at the snow where Eleanor's legacy lay scattered and damp. Carefully, reverently, I bent and picked up her will, its edges curling with moisture. He took financial documents, my late wife's will, Boeing stock certificates worth over $2 million, bank records, everything. The officer's eyes widened, his professional mask slipping for just an instant. 2 million, sir, that puts this into grand larceny territory. And as he said it, the words seemed to hang in the frozen air, heavy and irrevocable. My son had turned his mother's life's work, her nest egg for our future, into nothing more than a crime scene. And there I stood, torn between grief and fury, watching police lights dance across the ruins of my family. Frank Larson appeared from his house, the glow of his porch light casting a halo around his stooped figure. He had thrown a bathrobe over his pajamas, the belt tied hastily, slippers crunching through the crusted snow as he approached our strange midnight gathering. His weathered face, lined by years of winters harsher than this one, showed both relief and lingering concern as his eyes swept over the scene, patrol cars, flashing lights, officers at work, and me standing in the wreckage of my trust. "Frank, you're the one who called me," I asked, pieces falling into place at last. He nodded, rubbing his chilled hands together. "Saw someone moving around with a flashlight inside your house. Must have been around 9 o'clock. Couldn't just sit there and ignore it, not on Christmas night." He gave a small shrug, like it was nothing, though. I knew it had taken courage. "Had to dig out your phone number from the neighborhood directory." He glanced toward the officers, then back at me. "You saved more than just my possessions tonight," I said, reaching out to clasp his shoulder. The simple gesture carried all the gratitude words couldn't fully express. It meant something in this fractured world, that neighbors still looked out for each other, still cared enough to get involved. The lead officer, who had been quietly observing, looked between us with a dawning understanding. His brows drew together as the story sharpened into focus. "So this wasn't a random break-in," he said slowly. I swallowed hard, forcing the bitter truth out. "No. Mr. Reed here." I gestured toward Alton, now handcuffed and slumped in the back seat of the patrol car. He knew the house would be empty. "He's my son's friend. My son knew I'd be at his place for Christmas dinner. He planned this whole thing." The words burned my throat as I spoke them, like acid on raw skin. The betrayal wasn't just Alton's, it was Amos's, my own flesh and blood. Through the patrol car window, Alton stared out with a hollow expression, the look of a man watching his entire future collapse in real time. The officer beside him, pen scratching steadily across his notepad, listened as details spilled out: the gambling debts, the desperate scheme, the manipulation of family tradition on a night meant for unity and grace. And then my phone rang again. Its piercing tone cut through the official atmosphere of the investigation, too bright, too insistent. I glanced down. "Amos." The name lit up the screen like an accusation. I lifted my gaze toward the officer. "Should I answer that?" He gave a slight nod, a faint edge of curiosity in his tone. "Go ahead. Might be interesting to hear what he says." With a deep breath, I accepted the call and switched to speaker so everyone could hear. "Hello, Amos." "Dad." His voice came warm, practiced the perfect blend of concern and confusion. "Where are you? We're all getting worried. You've been gone for over an hour." I looked past the flashing lights, past the officers moving through procedure, and into the snowy dark beyond. My voice was calm, almost too calm. "I'm coming back, son. We need to have a conversation." Silence stretched across the connection. I could almost hear the gears in his head turning, calculating. Is everything all right? You sound different." "Everything will be clear very soon," I said, and before he could shape another excuse, I ended the call. The officers wrapped up their paperwork while I crouched to gather the scattered documents from the snow. Each page I lifted felt like salvaging a piece of Eleanor's legacy. Her will, her stock certificates, her careful banking notes, each one soaked with melted snow edges, curling words still legible. The Boeing stock certificates felt impossibly heavy in my hands, far heavier than their paper form. 30 years of her life were pressed into those pages, every penny saved from her modest teacher's salary, every sacrifice made quietly for the future she believed we'd share. "We'll need you to come in tomorrow to finalize your statement," the lead officer said, slipping a card into my hand. His voice was steady, professional, but his eyes softened. "Mr. Reed will be charged with breaking and entering, attempted grand larceny, and likely a few more things once we finish sorting through it all." I nodded numbly, my fingers tightening around Eleanor's papers, as though I could anchor myself in her memory. As the patrol cars finally pulled away, their tires crunching over the snow, Frank walked beside me toward my own vehicle. We both watched the red taillights fade into the distance, leaving behind only silence and the faint glow of street lamps. Through the rear window of the cruiser, Alton's pale, defeated face had lingered like some grim ghost of Christmas future, warning me of the ruin greed and betrayal could bring. "You sure you're okay to drive back there?" Frank asked gently, his breath clouding in the frozen air. His words carried more than simple concern. They carried the weight of a friend who knew the night had torn something inside me that no police report could ever mend. "That's going to be a tough conversation," Frank said quietly, his breath fogging in the night air. I stood for a long moment at the edge of my driveway, my eyes drawn back to the house I had once called sanctuary. The broken basement window yawned like an open wound, in its brick foundation jagged edges, glinting in the cold glow of police headlights now fading into the distance. Snow lay scattered and trampled, scarred by boots that had no right to touch my home. And there on the front door, the Christmas wreath swayed gently in the icy breeze, its red ribbon bright against the wood, mocking, almost cruel in its cheer. Peace on earth, tonight had been anything but peaceful. "Some conversations can't wait, Frank." I murmured, my voice rough with fatigue and something deeper, betrayal maybe, or the raw sting of truth. Some truths need to be told while they're fresh before they're buried under excuses and lies. My car engine groaned when I turned the key, a reluctant protesting roar, as though even the machine resisted being dragged into this night of reckoning. But it started, and that was enough. As I backed slowly out of the driveway, my headlights swept across the house once more. For the briefest second, the beam caught the wreath again, its cheerful red bow glowing like a cruel joke against the wreckage of family trust and Christmas harmony. Beside me on the passenger seat lay Eleanor's will, its edges still damp but intact, and the Boeing stock certificates she had guarded for decades. They looked ordinary, just paper and ink, but to me they were the very embodiment of her faith in the future, her love, her sacrifice. Rescued tonight from betrayal, they were safe now. At least her legacy would survive, even if the family didn't. The drive to Amos's house was short, but it felt like I was crossing miles of silence, every second tightening the knot in my chest. His house glowed in the distance, warm and inviting, with strings of Christmas lights twinkling across the porch, like a postcard-perfect promise of joy. My headlights swept across the siding, then the windows where golden light spilled outward into the cold. A facade of happiness, neighbors passing by would see nothing but family gathered in peace. But I knew better. Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of the scene inside Amos, pacing near the Christmas tree, his movements restless, agitated. Violet stood near him, her hands raised slightly, gesturing in a way that suggested pleading or calming. Around them, the room bore the hallmarks of holiday warmth, a tree glittering with ornaments. Stockings still hung wrapping paper abandoned on the floor. The illusion of normalcy of tradition. The papers on my passenger seat suddenly felt heavier than iron. Eleanor's will still bearing her neat looping signature from decades ago. The Boeing stock certificates, official and cold, yet worth more than money could ever measure. The financial records that detailed a lifetime of careful planning and sacrifice. I gathered them carefully, almost reverently, knowing that these sheets of paper were no longer just documents. They were evidence. They were weapons. I didn't knock. Family doesn't need to knock. At least that's what I told myself, though. The word family felt poisoned in my mouth. I pushed the door open, stepping directly into the warmth of Amos's living room. The scene froze. Violet looked up from folding dish towels near the kitchen entrance, her face brightening in relief at first, then faltering as she saw my expression. Walter sat in his armchair, a magazine slipping unnoticed from his hands. Martha bent over a crossword puzzle at the dining table, her pencil stilled in midair. Children sprawled across the carpet, toys scattered their laughter, fading into silence as they noticed the tension riding in on my shoulders. "Truman, thank goodness," Violet said, hurrying toward me. Genuine worry creased her face. "What happened? You look terrible." I didn't answer her. Instead, I stepped forward and laid the documents on the coffee table with deliberate care. Eleanor's familiar handwriting gleamed in the lamplight, her signature a ghostly presence in the room. The Boeing letterhead on the stock certificates caught Walter's eye, the bank routing numbers printed with cold precision on financial statements. "Ask your husband what happened," I said evenly, my voice carrying the weight of ice. Amos' face transformed before my eyes from relief to confusion to dawning alarm. He stared at the papers as though each one was a shard of glass, pointed directly at him. His lips moved soundlessly before words finally formed. "Dad, I don't understand what you're talking about." I kept my tone measured, each syllable deliberate. "These are Eleanor's will, the Boeing stock certificates, the documents your friend Alton tried to steal from me tonight." Silence dropped like a stone into the room. Violet gasped softly. Walter's magazine slid from his fingers and landed on the floor with a dull slap. Martha's pencil rolled across the crossword forgotten. "He's in police custody now," I continued, not raising my voice, not needing to. "Charged with breaking and entering. Attempted grand larceny." Walter finally found his voice, incredulous. "Stock certificates." "What stocks?" I lifted the damp but legible will. Eleanor's writing trembling faintly in my grip. "Boeing shares. Eleanor's savings. 30 years of her careful investing penny by penny from her teacher's salary. She left me shares worth over $2.3 million. The weight of those words hung in the air, colliding with the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree, clashing with the children's toys still scattered at my feet. And in the center of it all, Amos stared at me, pale, as though the room had suddenly shrunk around him, and the truth itself had left no air to breathe. I looked around the room, letting my gaze fall on each face as the truth sank in. Shock rippled first, then confusion, and slowly an aching, heavy understanding. The silence was so dense it felt like the air itself had thickened, pressing down on us all. "She bought those stocks over 30 years ago," I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. "Every paycheck from her modest teacher's salary she invested bit by bit when Boeing was barely staying afloat. It wasn't luck, it was her faith, her discipline, her sacrifice. That is Eleanor's legacy." I paused, letting the weight of her name settle over the room. Amos flinched. Violet's eyes darted between me and her husband, as if silently pleading for him to prove me wrong. "Amos found out," I continued, "that I plan to donate the inheritance to veterans who serve their country, to schools that need books and scholarships, to causes that meant something to Eleanor." Dad, Amos finally spoke, his voice cracking, brittle as thin ice. His carefully cultivated mask, the confident smile, the rational tone crumbled before us all, exposing desperation raw and naked. "That's our family inheritance. You can't just give it all away to strangers." I met his gaze, steel in my voice. "I can do whatever I choose with my money, but you, Amos, you chose theft. You chose lies. You chose betrayal." Violet sank onto the couch like her legs had given out beneath her one trembling hand covering her mouth. Her eyes widened as the pieces connected: the Christmas invitation, the sudden warmth after months of distance, the orchestrated reconciliation. All of it nothing but a smokescreen, a setup. "You use Christmas," I said, turning fully toward my son, no longer shielding him from the truth. "You used your children's laughter, your wife's goodness, even my grief for your mother, all to give your friend cover while he ransacked my house." Across the room, Martha's crossword puzzle slipped from her lap, fluttering to the floor like fallen snow. Her lips trembled. "Amos, please tell us this isn't true." But denial was useless now. The evidence lay scattered on the coffee table: the will in Eleanor's handwriting, the Boeing stock certificates, the financial statements. And Alton, handcuffed in a police car, had already stripped away the last defense Amos might have had. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," Amos burst out, his words tumbling frantic. "The debts, the people I owe." "How much?" Walter interrupted, his voice low, sharp, the voice of a man who had managed numbers all his life and knew the weight of a dollar. Amos swallowed hard, his face gray. 200,000. The words fell like a grenade into the room. The silence that followed was jagged, brittle. "Bad investments," Amos whispered. "Some gambling." It started small. I thought I could fix it, but it grew, it just kept growing. I couldn't breathe under it anymore. "So your solution?" Violet's voice cracked, her body shaking as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Was to steal from your father on Christmas, to use our children as props in your little scheme." From the floor, Timmy looked up from his half-assembled model airplane, his small brow furrowed. "Why is everyone yelling?" he asked in a tiny voice. Beside him, Sarah hugged her new art supplies to her chest, colored pencils spilling across the carpet like rainbow shards of a family breaking apart before her very eyes. I knelt, forcing my voice to soften, though my heart ached. "Your father made some very bad choices," I told them gently, my eyes never leaving Amos. "Choices that hurt people who trusted him. I didn't want to hurt anyone." Amos sobbed, his composure collapsing entirely now. Years of carefully woven deception shredded by exposure. I just needed more time to fix things to pay them back. Walter stood abruptly, the magazine forgotten at his feet. His quiet, measured demeanor was gone, replaced by thunderous outrage. "By stealing from your father, by lying to your wife, by turning your own children into alibis for a crime?" His voice shook with fury. Violet's sobs deepened, not soft, graceful tears, but the broken, shuddering cries of a woman watching her entire world disintegrate. And in that moment I realized Christmas night had delivered no peace, no joy, only truth. And truth once spoken can never be taken back. "How long, Amos?" My voice cut through the silence, low but trembling with fury and heartbreak. "How long have you been lying to me about money, about work, about everything?" Martha instinctively drew the children closer, wrapping her arms protectively around their small shoulders, as though her embrace alone could shield them from the collapse of the world they thought was safe. Their wide, confused eyes darted from face to face, trying to piece together why their Christmas morning had dissolved into shouting tears and despair. I looked around the room, my chest tight. Violet sat crumpled, her tears streaming unchecked. Walter and Martha wore the hollow shock of parents who had just watched their son's character unravel before them. And Amos. Amos was slumped in his chair, head buried in his hands, the mask gone at last. Guilt and desperation radiated from him in waves. This was no longer a family gathered for celebration. It was a battlefield, and greed had been the blade that cut us apart. "The Boeing shares," I said firmly, sweeping the evidence from the coffee table and stacking the documents with deliberate care, "will go to veterans programs and to education funds. Just as Eleanor wanted. That will not change." I rose to my feet. My voice hardened, not from anger, but from the weight of truth. She believed in helping others, in building something that outlived her. "And you," I fixed Amos with a look so sharp he flinched without raising his eyes. "You turned her legacy into a prize to be stolen." The room was still except for Violet's sobs and the sound of a toy rolling across the floor where one of the children had dropped it. Walter held Martha, whispering words I couldn't hear, while she clutched his arm like a woman trying to steady herself on shaking ground. At the doorway, I turned back one last time. My gaze softened on Violet and the children. "You are innocent in this," I told her gently. "You and the children will always have a place in my home." Her face crumpled into fresh tears, and I stepped into the cold December night. Behind me, the glow of Christmas lights flickered against the shattered piece of what had once been my family. Ahead of me, the icy air stung my cheeks, but at least it was honest. It didn't lie. It didn't betray. The next morning, pale winter sunlight filtered through my kitchen window, stretching long shadows across the table. On its surface, Eleanor's rescued documents lay neatly arranged beside her framed photograph. She smiled from the picture, that quiet, steady smile I had leaned on so many times. Steam curled upward from my chipped mug, the one she had given me 20 years ago, its world's best husband lettering, faded but still legible. I wrapped my hands around it, letting its warmth seep into me as I studied the stock certificates again, this time with clearer eyes. They were not just numbers on a page. They were stories, proof of her faith and her resilience. September 1995, when Boeing bled layoffs and Eleanor, ever steady, believed the company would rise again. March 2001, when the world reeled from 9/11, airline stocks plummeted and she chose hope instead of fear. December 2008, when panic gripped the markets and she, quiet, steadfast, bought with unshaken trust in the future. Every date was a chapter of her courage, her vision, her refusal to let fear dictate her choices. The ring of the phone shattered the quiet. I glanced at the caller ID, Violet. My chest tightened. I hesitated before answering. Truman, her voice came soft but raw, swollen from crying. "I'm so sorry. I never knew about Amos's plans, about any of it." "Violet," I said gently, "none of this is your fault. You're a good woman who trusted the wrong man." Her breath shook on the other end of the line. Then her words spilled out quickly as if they had been trapped inside her chest too long. I'm filing for divorce. I won't live with someone who could do what he did. The children don't deserve a criminal for a father. For a moment, the silence was heavy between us. Then I spoke. You'll always be welcome in my life, Violet. You and the children. Her voice broke gratitude and grief mingling. Thank you. That means everything right now. When the line went dead, I set the phone down and looked again at Eleanor's photo. I heard her voice in memory, the way she used to speak about family, about integrity, about doing what was right even when it hurt. She would have been devastated by Amos' betrayal, but she would have been proud that truth had finally found its way to light. A knock at the front door pulled me from my thoughts. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen, heavy with both promise and dread. I rose slowly, my hand brushing across Eleanor's photo, as if drawing strength from her spirit, and walked toward the door to face whatever came next. Frank Larson stood on my porch, his weathered face etched with lines of concern. For a moment, he just looked at me, studying the grief written all over my expression before finally speaking. How are you holding up, Truman? How do you even survive something like this? I drew in a shaky breath, trying to keep my voice steady. It hurts, Frank. It hurts more than I thought a heart could bear. But at least I'm free from the lies now. I can breathe again. I stepped aside and gestured him in. In that moment, nothing felt more comforting than the presence of a loyal friend standing beside me as the wreckage of family still smoldered in my chest. We sat at the old wooden table, coffee steaming between us. Frank put a hand on my shoulder, his voice steady and firm like an anchor. You did the right thing. The truth matters, even when it cuts us open. Eleanor would be proud of you, Truman. She would be proud that justice came first, that you chose integrity over false loyalty. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight in my chest ease just a little. Together we discussed the practical things, changing the locks, upgrading security, revising my will, to ensure Amos would never again come close to Eleanor's inheritance. Frank's years in law enforcement gave his words weight, and I listened, grateful to have him guiding me like a seasoned watchman. When his eyes landed on the stack of Boeing stock certificates, he asked quietly, "What do you plan to do with these?" I held the papers carefully, as though they carried not just financial worth, but Eleanor's spirit itself. I'll honor her memory. Every dollar will go to veterans organizations, to scholarships for teachers, to programs that build communities instead of tearing them apart. Frank's weathered face softened, and he gave a slow, approving nod. She would smile at that. She would love that. After he left, I wasted no time. I called my attorney to schedule an appointment to revise my will. Then I phoned the bank to add more security to my safe deposit box. Eleanor deserved peace, and her legacy deserved protection from greedy hands. The house felt different now. Not lonely, not hollow, but peaceful. The false smiles and the pretense were gone. I was 68 years old, and while my body had grown older, my heart longed for a life that was cleaner, freer, stripped of deception. I still had friends who valued truth, a daughter-in-law who understood integrity, and grandchildren who deserved role models better than Amos could ever be. My phone buzzed with a message from Violet. The kids want to know when they can visit Grandpa Truman again. A smile tugged at my lips. My fingers tapped back quickly. Anytime. We'll start new traditions together. I lifted my eyes to Eleanor's photograph on the mantel. In the tenderness of her smile, I felt her presence, almost heard her whisper, "Do the right thing, Truman. Let love live on through the good you choose to share." I whispered back, my throat tight with emotion. Your Boeing shares will help people build new lives, Eleanor. Just the way you would have wanted. Amos chose greed over family lies, over love, theft over trust. But I choose honor over blood, truth over comfort, integrity over everything. The December morning sun streamed through the windows, catching dust motes that floated like tiny prayers in golden light. Outside, fresh snow blanketed the street, white and unbroken, like the promise of a clean beginning. I opened the front door and breathed in the crisp winter air. The neighborhood lay still and silent, and I thought of Frank standing on that very porch like a sentinel guarding the truth. The road ahead of me was smaller than the future I once imagined, but it was clearer now, built on a foundation that could never crumble under lies. Eleanor's legacy was safe. The truth had triumphed over deception. And family, the real kind, built not on blood, but on love, respect, and loyalty would endure. That was enough. That was everything. Thank you for listening to today's story. If it touched your heart, please leave a like, subscribe to D-Daily Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Each story is a journey of love, truth, and unforgettable life lessons. Don't forget to click on the box to the left to continue with the next story. Once again, thank you for being with D-Daily Stories. See you in the next story.